When I phoned my son Javier that morning, the sun was just beginning to warm the balconies of our old building. I had just finished ironing the purple dress I bought years ago in Caracas. It was a beautiful dress, deep violet silk with tiny silver flowers near the collar. I bought it for a very special day, my son's church wedding. For weeks it had been hanging in my closet, covered carefully in plastic. Every time I saw it, I imagined the moment, the music inside the church, white flowers everywhere, Javier standing proudly in his suit, and me, his mother, sitting in the first row. So that morning I picked up the phone. I just wanted to confirm the date of the church ceremony. Young people change plans quickly these days. The phone rang twice. Then someone answered. But it wasn't Javier. It was my daughter-in-law, Valeria. Her voice sounded sweet, almost too sweet. "Ay, suegra, good morning." I smiled politely. "Buenos dias, Valeria. Is Javier there?" "No, he stepped out for a moment." "Oh, that's fine," I said. "I only wanted to confirm the date of the church wedding." There was a small pause, very small, but long enough for a mother to notice. Then she laughed softly. Not a happy laugh, more like a whisper. "Ay, suegra, we already did it." For a second I thought I heard wrong. "What do you mean?" "The wedding," she said casually. "We already got married." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Civil only," she continued. "Very intimate." Another small pause. Then she added the sentence that I will never forget. "Only people who really matter." Only people who really matter. The words stayed in the air like smoke, and suddenly my chest felt heavy. Not the woman who sold her mother's gold earrings so Javier could furnish his first apartment. Not the woman who woke up at 5 in the morning making arepas so he could sell them after school and earn extra money. Apparently, I was not someone who really mattered. I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I said softly, "Oh, I see." For a few seconds after she said those words, I couldn't speak. Only people who really matter. The sentence kept echoing in my head. Valeria's voice on the phone sounded cheerful, almost relieved. "Yes, it was very small," she continued. "Just close friends." Close friends. I imagined them standing together somewhere nice, smiling for photos, holding glasses of champagne, laughing, and in every picture there would be an empty space where the mother of the groom should have been. But apparently that space was not important. "Well," I finally said, "congratulations." "Thank you, suegra," Valeria replied quickly. Her voice sounded bright again, as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just erased me from one of the most important moments of my son's life. We said goodbye. Then the call ended. I sat quietly at the kitchen table. The purple dress was still lying on the chair next to me, waiting, like a guest who never received an invitation. For a long time I just stared at it. The silk fabric reflected the sunlight coming through the window. I slowly picked it up, ran my fingers over the silver embroidery. I remembered the day I bought it. Caracas was hot that afternoon. I had walked past the shop window and saw the dress on a mannequin. I immediately imagined myself wearing it at Javier's wedding. Proud, happy, a mother watching her son begin a new life. I even told the shopkeeper why I wanted it. "My son is getting married," I said. She smiled warmly and told me it was a beautiful choice. But now, the wedding had already happened, and I wasn't there, not even invited. I folded the dress carefully, very carefully, as if it were something fragile. Then I placed it back inside the closet, closed the door, and that was the moment something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door slowly closing. The next few weeks passed normally, or at least they looked normal from the outside. I watered my plants every morning. I visited the bakery downstairs for my coffee. I watched my favorite evening shows with my neighbor Carmen. Carmen lived 2 floors above me. She had been my friend for almost 20 years. She always said the same thing about Valeria. That girl smiles too much. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Now, I wasn't so sure. During those weeks, I didn't call Javier. Not once. If he wanted to speak to me, he knew my number. But my phone stayed silent. Until one afternoon, it rang, and the name on the screen was exactly the one I expected. Valeria. I answered calmly. Hello? Her voice sounded different this time, less sweet, more careful. Suegra, how are you? I'm fine, mi amor. There was a small hesitation. Then she said, I actually wanted to ask you something. And at that moment, I already knew where the conversation was going. Because in life, some people only remember you when they need something. I stayed quiet for a moment after she said she needed to ask me something. In my life, I had learned that when someone begins a conversation like that, money is usually involved. So, I said calmly, what do you need, Valeria? She cleared her throat. Well, our condo maintenance fee increased this month. I waited. And Javier's work has been a little slow lately. Of course. There it was, the real reason for the phone call. She continued speaking, her voice carefully polite. We were wondering if maybe you could help us just this once. Just this once. I looked around my small living room, the old wooden table, the sofa I had owned for 15 years, the small kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals for my family. Everything in that apartment carried a mummery, a sacrifice, most of them made for Javier. When his father died 11 years ago, everything changed overnight. Suddenly, I was mother and father at the same time. I worked 3 cleaning jobs. Sometimes I slept only 4 hours a night, but Javier never saw the worst parts of it. I always smiled when he came home. I always told him everything would be okay. And somehow, it was. He finished school, he found work, he built his own life. And now, apparently I was not someone who really mattered, but I was still someone who could pay bills. I returned to the present moment. Valeria was still talking. It's only temporary, she said. We'll pay you back soon. Of course they would. People always promise that. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, children were playing in the courtyard of the building. Someone was watering plants on the balcony across from mine. Life continued peacefully. Inside my chest, however, something had already decided the answer. So I spoke gently. Valeria, mi amor. She immediately sounded hopeful. Yes, suegra? I took a small breath. Then I said the words that had been waiting inside me since the wedding phone call. I only help people who consider me part of the family photo. Silence. Complete silence. I could almost hear her breathing through the phone. Then she spoke again, but this time the sweetness in her voice had disappeared. What do you mean? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply repeated it. I help family. Another pause, a longer one this time. Then, suddenly, the call ended. No goodbye, no thank you for your time, just the sharp click of the line disconnecting. I placed the phone on the table. For a moment, I wondered if I should feel guilty, but strangely, I didn't. For the first time in weeks, the heaviness inside my chest felt lighter, like something had finally been said out loud. That evening, I visited Carmen upstairs. We drank coffee and listened to old salsa music like we always did. She noticed immediately that something was different. "You look calmer today," she said. I smiled. "Maybe I am." She raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" So I told her the whole story, the phone call, the wedding, the maintenance fee, everything. When I finished, Carmen shook her head slowly. "I told you about that girl." Then she leaned closer and said something that made me laugh. "Careful, comadre. People like that don't like hearing no." I laughed again. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. But 3 days later, the doorbell rang, and Carmen's words suddenly felt like a warning. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. It was early afternoon. I had just finished watering the plants on my balcony when I heard it. Ding dong! I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. When I opened it, I immediately felt something was wrong. Javier was standing there. Next to him was Valeria. But they weren't alone. 2 other people stood behind them. A man in a gray suit holding a folder, and a woman with glasses carrying a small notebook. Everyone looked very serious. Too serious for a simple visit. "Hola, Mama," Javier said quickly. His voice sounded nervous. I stepped aside so they could enter. "Come in." They all walked into the living room. The man in the gray suit placed his folder on the table. The woman sat down quietly on the sofa. Something inside my stomach tightened. "What's going on?" I asked. Javier looked at Valeria. Valeria looked at the man in the suit. Finally, the man cleared his throat. "Good afternoon, señora," he said politely. "My name is Mr. Delgado. I am a notary." Notary. The word immediately made the room colder. "And this is Dr. Ruiz," he continued, pointing to the woman. "She's a psychologist." A psychologist. Now my confusion was turning into something else. Suspicion. I crossed my arms. Why exactly are a notary and a psychologist in my living room? Valeria sighed dramatically, as if she were tired. "Suegra, please don't make this difficult." "Don't make this difficult?" Javier avoided looking at me. The notary opened his folder. "We're here to discuss a legal arrangement," he explained. "What arrangement?" I asked sharply. The psychologist spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, professional. "Your family is concerned about you." "Concerned? Concerned about what?" I asked. Valeria exchanged another look with Javier. Then she spoke carefully. "You've been confused lately." Confused? The word hung in the air like poison. My heartbeat suddenly became louder. "Confused?" I repeated. Javier finally spoke. "Mom, please understand. After Dad passed away, my husband died 11 years ago." 11 years? I stared at my son. "You think I'm confused because your father died 11 years ago?" The psychologist opened her notebook. "We simply want to evaluate your situation," she said calmly. The notary slid some papers across the table. "In cases like this, families sometimes arrange guardianship." Guardianship. It took only 1 second for me to understand everything. They weren't worried about me. They wanted control. Control of the apartment, control of my money, control of everything. My chest burned with anger, but I didn't shout. Not yet. Instead, I slowly walked toward the balcony door. Valeria frowned. "Suegra, what are you doing?" I opened the balcony.
Fresh air rushed into the room. Then I leaned over the railing and took a deep breath, and suddenly I shouted with all the strength in my lungs, "Vecinos!" My voice echoed through the entire courtyard. People looked up from their windows. Doors opened. Balcony curtains moved. "Vengan! Come here!" I pointed inside the apartment. "Están tratando de quitarme la casa!" They are trying to take my house. Behind me, chaos exploded inside the living room. "Mom, stop!" Javier shouted. Valeria looked terrified. The notary started collecting his papers quickly, but it was already too late. Because in this building, news travels faster than the wind, and within minutes, half the neighbors were coming upstairs. Within minutes, the hallway outside my apartment filled with voices. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped out onto their balconies. Others came upstairs to see what was happening. In a building like ours, nothing stays private for long. My friend Carmen arrived first. She pushed through the crowd and entered the apartment. "What's going on?" she asked loudly. I pointed toward the living room. "These people are trying to take my house." The room suddenly became very uncomfortable. The notary in the gray suit looked nervous. The psychologist closed her notebook. Valeria's confident smile had completely disappeared. And Javier, my son couldn't even look at me. Carmen crossed her arms. "Take your house?" she said sharply. "What kind of nonsense is this?" Behind her, more neighbors started entering the apartment. Mr. Rodriguez from the third floor, the twins from the second floor, even old Doña Marta, who rarely leaves her home anymore. Someone whispered, "Call the police." Someone else lifted their phone and started recording everything. Valeria noticed immediately. Her face turned pale. "Please," she said nervously, "there's been a misunderstanding." But the neighbors were already asking questions. "Why is a notary here? Why a psychologist? What papers are those?" The man in the gray suit tried to stay calm. "This is simply a family matter," he said. But by then, the situation had already escaped their control. People were filming, talking, arguing. In our neighborhood, stories spread quickly, and this one was spreading like fire. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 officers walked into the crowded apartment. They listened carefully while everyone spoke at the same time. Finally, one of them raised his hand. "Enough," he said firmly. Then he looked at the notary. "Do you have proof that this woman is incapable of managing her own affairs?" The notary hesitated. "No, we were only beginning the evaluation process." The officer nodded slowly. Then he looked at me. "Señora, do you feel threatened or pressured by these people?" I answered clearly, "Yes." The room went silent. The officer turned back to Javier and Valeria. "You should leave." Valeria opened her mouth to argue, but the second officer shook his head. "Now." Within minutes, they were gone. The notary packed his papers, the psychologist closed her notebook, and Javier followed Valeria out of the apartment without saying a single word to me. The hallway slowly emptied. Neighbors returned to their homes, but several of them had already uploaded the videos online. By evening, the story had spread through the entire barrio. Everyone was talking about it. A son trying to take his mother's home. It did not make Javier and Valeria look very good. The following week, something interesting happened. The legal papers they had prepared were quietly withdrawn. No more calls, no more visits. Just silence. A deep, peaceful silence. A month later, I made a decision. I moved out of that apartment, not because they forced me, because I wanted a new beginning. Now I live with my comadre Carmen. Her apartment is smaller, but it's full of laughter. Every Friday night we play music, old salsa songs. Sometimes we dance in the living room like we're 20 years old again. Life feels lighter now. Javier calls once every 3 months. The phone rings. I look at the screen, and I let it ring. Some people only remember you when they need something, and some mothers eventually learn how to stop answering.